All right, here we go. 3 days, 10 votes. The 10th round is wrapping up as we speak, and still no speaker. Is there a path forward for House Republicans without Kevin McCarthy? Who in the party could come close to hitting the magic number of 218 votes? Let's go to Orlando, Florida, where Congressman Alan Grayson is standing by. Alan Grayson represented Florida's 8th and 9th congressional districts. Howie Klein calls him the smartest man he's ever met. I think he'd say the same thing about Congressman Ted Lieu. I call Alan Grayson a national treasure who, during the height of the illegal invasion of Iraq, was one of the few voices of morality and sanity, which in America are not often related to one another. It's good to hear your voice, sir.
Thank you. You too.
All right. It looks like Kevin McCarthy is going to fail on the 10th vote. They're tallying it up as we speak. I have been told that Kevin McCarthy is not smart, that he literally cannot count votes. Is that true? And if it is true, where does Kevin McCarthy get his power from? Who is financing Kevin McCarthy?
He's not that smart. I don't think he's an idiot, but he's not.
I'm sorry?
He's not an idiot, but he's not very intelligent. As to where he gets power from, it's on K Street in Washington, where the lobbyists work. And he has relentless networks.
I'm sorry?
To generate tens of millions of dollars for the party.
Okay, you're breaking up just a little. So you're saying that he gets his money from K Street, where he's able to generate tens of millions of dollars that he doles out.
Right. That is his shtick.
Okay. And do we know, we know that Hakeem Jeffries and Chuck Schumer are getting their money from Wall Street. Do we know specifically which industries are bankrolling Kevin McCarthy?
Many, but he started with the traditional ones like oil and gas and banking.
I see. And that's what...
The ones who have leaned GOP for a long time.
Okay. And that's where the power comes from. He's not... Obviously, he has no power of persuasion. It just comes from his ability to dole out money. Is there any other skill that he has that makes him the putative leader of the House Republicans?
Not as far as I can see. And he was so relentless about it that when he was elected to Congress, there's a 2-month gap between the election and when you're sworn in. And McCarthy spent that time getting to know fundraising victims, donors in Washington, D.C., among the lobbyists of the PACs.
He should not have brought this vote to the floor if he didn't have the vote. Isn't there a Hastert rule? Don't bring any votes to the floor if you can't win it. What does he have? Well, we'll talk about that in a second. So Trump has been supposedly working the phones on behalf of Kevin McCarthy. So what kind of sway does Trump have over House Republicans? And how many, I noticed that Matt Gaetz, I think in the today, 7th or 8th round, nominated Trump for speaker. That is a possibility. There may be a Deus Machina where Trump will come down from the sky and save the party from itself. So how much sway does Trump have over the House Republicans? How many votes could he get if he ends up running for speaker? And define Deus Machina.
God from the machine. It's Latin.
What?
You're not gonna win that game with me.
What is the definition of Deus Machina? You got it right. You were just breaking up.
I can do something about that. Geez, I hope it's not impairing the listener's pleasure. To get back to the earlier part,
We have,
but they're so dim in my memory at this point. That was a pretty long question.
okay, so let's
But
start
to
from
answer
the
your
beginning.
question,
Yeah.
the answer is none. Okay, the answer is none. Now the question is, what's the question? It's like playing Jeopardy.
Uh-huh.
The question is, how much sway does Trump have? And we've already run that experiment. We've seen the results. The answer is that he has none. He apparently called virtually all of the holdouts, and none of them changed their votes. So all of these Trumpettes and right-wing nuts appear to be unwilling to listen to the master of the nuttery himself.
Is he secretly holding out hope that he will be asked to unify the Republicans and be brought in as Speaker?
I don't think he would be able to avoid the same problem. I mean, there's got to be at least 4 members of the caucus, at least 5 members of the caucus, who would refuse to vote for him for Speaker. And it's just an intrinsically hard thing. You referred to the Hastert rule before. The Hastert rule simply says that you need a majority of the caucus in order to move ahead with something. In other words, you can't rely upon Democratic votes. You have to be able to have a majority of the Republican caucus majority. But under the present circumstances, unless somebody changes the rules, you need more than a majority of the caucus. You need a majority of the House and a majority of the people voting in the House. And that's just much more difficult. I'm sure none of the Democrats vote for Trump. That's obvious.
Right.
And I have to think that there would probably be at least 5 Republicans who would refuse to do that. They would say, well, we can't vote for somebody who's not a member, or something like that. Well, whatever excuse I want to give. Republicans, despite the fact that they cleaned house in the last election, a lot of these Republicans are...
A lot of these Republicans are what?
upfront about it.
You broke
They
up.
fear or hate Trump.
A lot of these Republicans fear or hate Trump.
Or hate Trump.
Right. Who is making the rules in the House? Who has the gavel? Nancy Pelosi, I assume, surrendered the gavel. You have written that McCarthy can change the rules in the House, and it could be just a thumbs up, thumbs down plurality vote without having to hit 218. Does he have that power to change the rules right now?
The House has the power. McCarthy doesn't have the power, but the House itself has the power. The Constitution says the House shall set its rules. Given the fact that elections have occurred, whether or not the members are sworn in, the House tradition is that the one thing they can do is adopt rules. So by a majority vote right now, the House could adopt a rule that changes the requirement that the Speaker get 218 votes or thereabouts. And it actually happened once before in the 1800s. They found that they just couldn't get to a majority for any candidates, so they went with a plurality instead by changing the rules.
In order to change the rules, do you need a majority, or can you get by on a plurality?
You need a majority.
So it's kind of like trying to change the filibuster. You can't change the rules without these 20 far-right conservatives being on board, or at least enough. You got to get to 218 to change the rules. Correct?
Yeah, that's true. That is true. That the conservative nutty block, the holdouts, the 20 of them who refuse to vote for McCarthy because they want to save America, they say, the zealots. Let's call them that, the zealots. They would have to agree to. Some of them would have to agree to a change of the rules in order for the rules to be changed, but it's not the same thing. Clearly, there's some of them who hate McCarthy personally and are not going to vote for McCarthy under any circumstances. But they may not hate the rules personally. They may be willing to, change the rules because whatever their motivation might be, it's hard to say. But what you would need is you need to peel off enough of them to be able to change the rules and change the dynamic. Mm-hmm. And it would change the dynamic. I mean, if plurality was enough, then all 20 of these would basically have to choose. They'd have no choice. They'd have to choose between McCarthy and Jeffries. And I think that the great majority of them would end up choosing McCarthy under those circumstances. So if we're plurality vote instead of majority vote, the dynamic changes tremendously.
And is there the possibility of some kind of power sharing? You suggested some kind of power sharing between McCarthy and Jordan. Is that conceivable?
Well, you have to be specific about it. Between McCarthy and Jordan, you're talking about Jim Jordan.
Yeah.
Yes, I mean, in Israel, they've had a prime minister and an alternative prime minister now as an experiment for the past until recently, the past 4 years. And people regard that as an unsuccessful experiment. But the Constitution says there has to be a speaker. It doesn't say there has to be one speaker. So, in theory, they could be co-speakers. There's nothing in the Constitution that would prohibit that. It's just a matter of what the rules would say.
When do you think McCarthy is going to realize he can't get to 218? How many more rounds can he go?
Well, it's hard to tell because this is no longer a political experiment. It's a psychological experiment. And you reach that point at certain points in Congress. We reached that point a few times regarding government shutdowns. There was no way to tell how long that a shutdown would last or exactly how it would end. You'd literally have to bring in psychologists in order to have any clue about that. It reached a point where it's just not political anymore.
The 20 far
and that's
right,
kind of where we are.
You have 20 far right, let's call them perhaps insurrectionists who want to stop the functioning of our government. That is a crime, to stop the functioning of our government. They are stopping the peaceful transfer of power, actually, between Nancy Pelosi and whomever, Kevin McCarthy, supposedly. That's what the insurrectionists, some of the insurrectionists are being charged with, preventing the government from functioning. You have 18 out of that 20 are election deniers. These are people who have no problem with shutting down our government. So what's going to get those 20 far-right conservatives to get on board getting the legislative branch up and running again? Isn't this what they want? They don't want the legislative branch functioning, do they?
For the most part, no. I mean, as you point out, there's a very extreme correlation between the people who supported the January 6th riot/insurrection and the people who are preventing McCarthy from becoming a speaker, or anybody else from becoming speaker. So, yeah, I think that's a fair observation in general. I also think that they've reached the point that's a very dangerous point in politics in any country at any time, which is when people start to believe their own BS. If you listen to them and you listen to what they're saying is that they need to do this in order to save America. They're not too clear about what the threat is, except business as usual, which McCarthy represents, and that's a fair observation too. But they literally are having the time of their lives. People like Chip Roy, for instance, Boebert, they're having a time of their lives and glorifying themselves and trying to make themselves into angels or heroes on account of what they're doing here. And that's very dangerous in politics in general. That's how dictatorships start and how they're sustained. It's, by the way, the same thing, for instance, with Putin. At some point, Putin started to believe his own BS. And now look where we are.
We're talking about what, all it takes is 4 far-right Republicans to gum up the works? Is that the number?
5, I think. I think there's 222 Republicans now, and 218 would be a majority. So if 4 peeled off, you'd still have a majority, but if 5 peeled off, you would not.
Okay, so Boebert, Gates, Gosar, Andy Biggs, the guy Scott Perry in Pennsylvania. I mean, these are borderline, let's say, January 6th sympathizers. I know that Chip Roy voted to certify the election for Biden. He's the reasonable one in all this. When I think of Matt Gaetz, Lauren Boebert, Scott Perry, Paul Gosar, Andy Biggs, I think they'd be very happy to hold on to this power and watch Washington grind to an absolute standstill. That's why they were sent to Washington, to destroy it. So did our founding fathers, you're a constitutional scholar, you've written a book about impeachment. Did our founding fathers give us a workaround for something like this?
No, the founding fathers didn't even have to deal with parties. And the whole notion of parties isn't represented anywhere in the Constitution.
It was anathema to Washington, right?
Right. So, they couldn't really conceive of deadlock. They just assumed that people would, in the end, think things through, talk things through, and reach a sensible conclusion. And of course, that's not the world we live in anymore. But the deadlock that you're seeing is something that would have been completely foreign to them and just bizarre. They would have thought that this is just crazy. And by the way, the ones that you mentioned are only the ones that are well known. What you have behind them is another, 12 to 15 people who are MAGA nuts and just haven't found the right way to get the media's attention yet. But the signs are that psychologically they're exactly the same. They're zealots. They want to bring down the government. They want to, what's the term that was used back in the days? They want to suffocate it in its crib, or drown it in its crib, or something like that.
No, Grover Norquist said he wants to make government so small he can drown it in a bathtub.
Yes, right. Thank you. Thanks for recalling that for me.
I say to Grover, yeah, but you need government to make sure the water goes from the reservoir into your bathtub to drown it. You still need a government.
Right.
So,
right, but plus he really wants to make it small enough to fit inside a woman's vagina. But that's...
Oh, that's fantastic. So it's brinkmanship. We're looking at the possibility of this lasting how long, and when do we put the popcorn down and start getting scared? When does this start getting scary? We do have a budget for 2023, correct?
Part of the year, yeah, not the whole year. The answer is that it's an experiment unfolding right in front of our eyes. There's no obvious way forward. There's a number of possible ways forward. I noted today that the Democrats could try to capitalize on this to make equal representation on the committees and subcommittees, equal staffing budgets. You could avoid a motion to discharge, which is how the majority can force legislation to a vote in the House, a motion to discharge. That's what the Republicans would try to do in those circumstances. You could have equal earmarks. I mean, there's a definable agenda for those on our side who are willing to think that way and, make good calculations about ways to end this that are constructive for us. But there's no sign of that actually being discussed or even thought about at where these decisions are actually made. I mean, if Pelosi were still in charge, I think that would be that would be the thought of the day. What do we do in order to make this advantageous for us and the people who are relying upon us to do something good in their lives? But the current leadership doesn't seem to think that way.
So
they just want to enjoy the scenery.
Theoretically, if there is no government, no House of Representatives, no legislative branch, Biden skates for 2 years without oversight. Hunter Biden, no Hunter Biden investigation, and he can then issue executive orders that will be challenged in the Supreme Court, but not by a functioning House Oversight Committee, right? So who challenges, if there's no House of Representatives, I guess it's McConnell bringing Biden's executive orders before the Supreme Court?
No, it would be mostly state governors doing it, but I think that that's a really artificial sense of how the future actually works. A British prime minister was once asked, "What's the greatest risk to your success as prime minister?" And he said, "Events, dear boy, events." What if we didn't have a functioning House of Representatives and a worldwide pandemic happened? What if we didn't have a functioning House of Representatives and there was an enormous crash in the capital markets or the real estate markets? And what if we didn't have a functioning House of Representatives and unemployment hit 15%?
You want me to answer that? I can answer that.
Yes, I get to ask a question in this interview. This is fantastic. I never get to ask questions. Go ahead.
The answer is if there's a worldwide pandemic, nothing would change. We still don't have a new COVID bill. They still haven't been able to pass a COVID bill. If the economy crashes, it would be up to Jerome Powell over at the Federal Reserve, as it always is. We go to war without consulting Congress. It seems to me it's just spending bills and oversight that we'd be missing. What would we be missing?
I'm not as optimistic as you are. I mean, when there is a hurricane, generally you see Congress doing something about it. When there's some kind of other natural disaster, you see Congress doing something about it. You know, in terms of response to COVID, it reached $4 trillion. And then you get into the issue of what happens if there is a war. How are you going to conduct a war when half of one branch of 1/6 of government is not functioning properly?
When's the last time Congress declared war? I know we do authorizations, but with the War Powers Act, we can go. Biden can go right in, and can't he issue a $1 trillion coin without consulting Congress?
Well, some people, but Congress was issuing $1 trillion budgets, appropriating $1 trillion budgets during the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, and they had to do that. I mean, the Constitution, for instance, prohibits appropriations bills for defense that are more than 2 years long. So eventually, the military runs out of money. And as does everybody else. Now, there are rules about that. If, for instance, if they don't pass a budget, the FAA still operates because you don't want planes falling out of the sky, for instance. But those are pretty narrow exceptions. So anyway, the answer is I don't know. I mean, when the first time there was a government shutdown, people freaked out and they said, well, we're not going to have any air to breathe. Mm-hmm. It didn't work out to be that bad. We had air, but it's an experiment that you really don't want to run just to see what happens. The same thing with defaulting on the debt, which is we're just a few months away from, unless Congress acts. You don't really want to see if there's going to be a world crash on account of that. It's not an experiment that anybody really has to run, and they're curious to find out the result. You just want to try to avoid the problem.
Who is enjoying this? Who, not in terms of political parties, but would you say that there are some rich people who love the theatrics of all this and are not scared at all? Or are rich people scared about this? Are the powerful scared?
No, I mean, no, of course they're not scared. I mean, look what's happened to Elon Musk. He used to have 200 billion, now he has only 100 billion.
Right.
So, I mean, when you're that high up in space, it's a very, very long fall before you hit the ground. I don't think that any of them are worried about it. I think the ones who are enjoying themselves are the nutty 20. And you could see it. I mean, they voted last night. Some of them voted last night against adjourning. So they've come out, strongly against the concept of sleep.
Mm-hmm.
So they didn't want to stop the party.
Right.
I mean, think about that. What does that mean when you won't even agree on adjourning?
Right, right. So you have mentioned before you go, you rattled off some names who could possibly get the speakership. So you said, I don't know who this guy is, Hal Rogers. Who is Hal Rogers? Congressman Hal Rogers.
He's a congressman from Kentucky, the longest serving Republican. And people like him. He's very courtly, he's very dignified, he's very Southern. And he never gets into fights with people, and he's on the Appropriations Committee. He hands out money to people's districts all around the country. So he's popular.
And yet nobody's entered his name yet.
Nope.
Okay.
Nope, because he's a McCarthy guy, and that would be disloyal.
Okay. Pete Sessions. Who is Pete Sessions?
Congressman from Texas, got knocked out for one or two terms and came back, losing the seniority that accumulated, but he's still cumulatively been around for quite a while. Very popular with the Republican members, always looking to do favors for people. He was on the Rules Committee and would, consciously seek out Republican members and say, hey, let's work on some legislation together and I'll put it through the Rules Committee. So he's popular.
As I'm hearing you, there is the possibility that somebody like Hakeem Jeffries, who the entire Democratic caucus is behind, he has all the power, right? Because he could say, hey, you know what? We're going to, obviously, Hakeem Jeffries, can't become speaker, but I can make Pete Sessions speaker, right? People would vote for him in lockstep if Hakeem Jeffries, the Democrats, said, let's make Pete Sessions speaker. So there's a lot of power that Hakeem Jeffries has right now.
Only if he makes some kind of deal that's good for the Democrats. I mean, your power evaporates very quickly if people think you're doing dumb things with it.
But if
he were to do a deal like I just described,
right,
then yeah, that would accumulate power for him tremendously, because it would be a good deal that would help the party as a whole and the people who depend upon the Democratic Party. But if he were to say, I like the cut of his jib, so I'm going to take my votes and give them to Pete Sessions, that wouldn't work at all. I mean, Pete Sessions is a really, really right-wing Republican. He just happens to be a popular one.
I see. So
I mean, he's got personal skills the way that, the way that you kind of need to have in order to get to 218 votes, like Paul Ryan did. People genuinely like Paul Ryan, for better or for worse.
Right.
And that was enough to, for him to parlay into a speakership. I don't think you can make a deal without getting, major concessions from the Republicans, and the caucus just wouldn't go along with that.
Right. Tom Cole, you say, is a Republican who could possibly get to 218?
Yes. Again, somebody who people just on the other side, they just like him. They like Tom. And he cultivates that. I mean, as I mentioned on Twitter yesterday, what you're thinking, what you're going to see next is that there's going to be efforts to punish the holdouts who are, exercising their power to say no to everything. And that punishment in part takes the form of using party resources to defeat them in their next primary, which is only 18 months away. And what Tom Cole did yesterday is he said, we're not going to do that. We're not going to do anything to punish anybody. We're not going to take away their committee assignments. We're just not going to do that. And that's showing people love rather than the stick. And, that's what makes people like Tom popular. Most people like to be mothered rather than fathered.
But didn't McCarthy sow the seeds of his own destruction by not taking a stick to these 20 election deniers, even though he himself is an election denier? Don't you have to take a stick to these people?
I don't think that that's how their psychology works. I mean, probably out of the 20 of them, there's probably a couple of them who you could, defeat that way. You can get them to back down, but I don't see a lot of that in that group of people. These are people who are zealots, and they never ask themselves, gee, how is it that there's 435 members of Congress and only 20 of them see it the way I do?
Mm-hmm.
They just don't ask themselves those questions. They just assume that they're right and the other 95% is wrong. That when you're dealing with somebody like that, threatening doesn't get you too far. Right. It really doesn't. Then there was the same thing when we were in power, when the Democrats were in power. I don't remember a single occasion, not one single occasion, of Pelosi ever doing that. She A, it's not in her heart, and B, it just doesn't work.
Right.
The threatening people, it just isn't really going to win on it unless you're dealing with spineless people.
Right. I have one final question before we get to Mario Diaz-Balart. Who is he? And you say he could get possibly 218 votes?
Yeah, first of all, he's on the Appropriations Committee too, and he's very nice to people, and again, goes out of his way to, and particularly the other side, of course, he goes out of his way to, find ways to use his authority to, to the palpable advantage of other people. Like, I think it's, I could picture Mario saying to somebody who lives in Kansas, represents some Kansas district, gee, I really think it's time that your main city got new sewers. What do you think?
Mm-hmm.
Should we put that through the Appropriations Committee? So Mario, again, is like looking for ways to help people. Perfectly legitimate way for people to function in Congress. There's nothing wrong with that. Everybody, is supposed to be representing their districts and supposed to be finding good things for them. Wow. So Mario is good at that. And also Mario is not an Anglo. He's Cuban. And more, the Republican Party is challenged as being the party of racism. Right. So having a visible Hispanic leader like that, as they did with Rubio here in Florida when Rubio was Speaker of the Florida House, is perceived to be a very good thing for them.
Right. Do the Republicans pay a political price for this bedlam, or do they get rewarded for it?
I think that the public is so extremely cauterized by the Trump experience. Not just separated, but at a point now where half of the population thinks the other half is trying to kill them. Mm-hmm. The anti-vaxxers have been a public health threat to a large part of the population. And they in turn feel that the fact that they're told to get vaxxed is a public health threat to them. Right. So you literally have people who think the other side's trying to kill me. And that's the result of the lunacy that the national nervous breakdown that Trump has tried to induce. So do they have to pay a price for this? Not so far. The more polarized that they make the country, the more power they seem to have.
Yeah. We've been talking with Congressman Alan Grayson. He represented Florida's 8th and 9th congressional districts. And what I've taken away from this conversation, and it's been really valuable, is that Donald Trump is not the power broker in Washington, D.C. he once fancied himself to be. That Kevin McCarthy is going to have to step aside, and that what the impression that I'm getting from you is the real power broker right now is Hakeem Jeffries, because his caucus, not one single defector. If Hakeem Jeffries says jump, the entire Democratic caucus says how high. So it seems to me that he can make up the 20 votes that McCarthy can't get. So it's going to be Hakeem Jeffries who picks the next Republican speaker. Is that correct?
I don't think so. Um, there's no record so far of this particular leadership team being comfortable or knowledgeable in exercising power. So, the classic example is Mitch McConnell. Whether Mitch McConnell is in the majority or minority, Mitch McConnell is calling all the shots. And that's a political gift. That there are very few people in life who have that ability. Nancy Pelosi ran the House, and for more than a decade, never lost a vote. Never lost a single vote. You can look it up.
Mm-hmm.
And that also is an enormous gift. And frankly, she did it because people loved her. I once sat next to a congressman. She came over and said, "Can I count on you for this?" And he said, "Yes." And I said, "I think you just ended your political career." He said, "Maybe, but I love her."
You love her.
I think she's the greatest political leader that I have ever met.
Okay.
So there's no sign at this point that the current team has any track record. Now, they're brand new, so of course they have no track record, but there's no sign that they have any track record in knowing how to exercise that power like McConnell does, whether he's got the votes or not, and like Pelosi did whenever she was in charge. There's no sign of that. So what you're saying is just a hypothetical. We don't know if that's going to work out at all or not.
This isn't ending anytime soon, is it?
I don't know. I mean, look, people can wake up tomorrow and they could just feel different. It's one of the great puzzles of life and psychology. You never know what's going to happen when you wake up tomorrow, assuming you do wake up tomorrow.
Okay.
So I don't know if it's going to be long or it's going to be short. I can see different ways that it's not going to end. And for instance, you're not going to have those 20 people suddenly falling in love with Kevin McCarthy. I doubt you're going to have them intimidated into submission. I don't think those are viable ways out here. But as to which viable alternative and when it's going to happen, I don't know.
Interesting.
I do see that there are opportunities for our side that definitely should be exploited to the hilt because there are people who are counting upon us to make their lives better. And we have to use the power that we have in order to make that happen. I mean, it's kind of interesting to me that nobody's talking about negotiating with the Republicans over abortion right now.
Mm-hmm.
I think that might be a constructive time to do it. If McCarthy is willing to hand out absolutely anything to anybody, now would be a good time to try to hash that out.
Great.
And so on.
Great. This is the conversation with Alan Grayson, like the conversation with Howie Klein, you can't hear on any other show. I'm just so privileged and honored to have Congressman Alan Grayson. What is your Twitter handle? It's at Alan Grayson, right?
That's right.
Thank you, Congressman Alan Grayson.
Thank you.